The smell of charcoal and burnt hamburger grease hung thick in the humid Georgia air. 4th of July at the Mitchell family compound always felt more like a performance than a celebration. 3 generations crammed onto Uncle Robert's sprawling deck, everyone playing their assigned roles in the same tired script we'd been rehearsing for decades. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I stood at the edge of the crowd, paper plate balanced in one hand, watching my cousin Derek hold court near the grill. His navy uniform hung crisp and proud on the porch railing behind him, catching the afternoon sun like a beacon. 22 years old and fresh out of basic training, he was the family's newest golden boy, regaling a circle of wide-eyed relatives with stories that grew more heroic with each beer. "So there I was, face down in the mud at Great Lakes," Derek said, his voice carrying that practiced confidence of someone who'd found his audience. Drill instructors screaming in my face, and I'm thinking, this is it. This is what separates the men from the boys. Aunt Linda hung on every word, her eyes shining with the kind of pride I'd stopped expecting years ago. "Tell them about the obstacle course, honey." My grandmother, all 83 years of her, leaned forward in her folding chair. I always knew Derek had the warrior spirit, just like his grandfather. I took a bite of potato salad that tasted like mayonnaise and disappointment. The same potato salad Linda brought to every gathering, the same stories about family military legacy, the same careful omission of my name from any conversation that mattered. "What about you, Sophia?" The question cut through the afternoon chatter like a blade. My cousin Brandon, Derek's older brother, was grinning at me with that particular brand of malice he'd perfected since we were kids. "Still fixing computers at that little shop downtown?" The circle turned to look at me. Not with curiosity or genuine interest, but with the kind of polite attention you'd give a child who'd just walked into an adult conversation. I could feel the weight of their assumptions settling over me like a heavy blanket. "Something like that," I said, keeping my voice level. Brandon's grin widened. "Must be nice having a nice, safe job. Air conditioning, regular hours, no real pressure." He gestured toward Derek with his beer bottle. "Not like our boy here, putting his life on the line for his country." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Someone mentioned sacrifice. Someone else brought up service before self. The conversation began to flow around me again, like water around a stone. I'd heard variations of this speech my entire life. The Mitchell family had been in the military for 4 generations. My great-grandfather fought in World War II. My grandfather served in Korea. My father and Uncle Robert both did tours in Vietnam. It was the family business, they like to say, protecting freedom and carrying on tradition. But somehow, that tradition had never extended to the women. "Sophia always was the practical one," my mother chimed in from across the deck, her voice carrying that particular tone of maternal disappointment wrapped in false encouragement. "Some people are built for adventure, others for stability." I felt something twist in my chest, that familiar knot of frustration and hurt that came with being perpetually underestimated by the people who were supposed to know me best. They looked at me and saw exactly what they expected to see. A 28-year-old woman who'd never left her hometown, never taken a real risk, never done anything worthy of the family stories they loved to tell. Derek was warming up for another tale when 4 men approached the deck from the driveway. They moved with a particular kind of purposeful calm that made everyone else's posture suddenly seem sloppy by comparison. Clean-shaven, alert eyes that missed nothing, the kind of bearing that said military without needing to announce it. Uncle Robert noticed them first. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The tallest of the 4, a man with graying temples and shoulders that could hold up a building, stepped forward. "Sorry to interrupt your gathering, sir. We're looking for Sophia Chen." The deck went quiet. Not conversation lull quiet, but funeral quiet. 23 pairs of eyes swiveled toward me like I just sprouted a second head. That's me," I managed, my voice sounding strange in the sudden silence. The man's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. His eyes found mine and held them, and I saw something there I couldn't quite identify. Recognition, maybe, or respect. Ma'am, I'm Commander James Sullivan. These are Petty Officers Martinez, Thompson, and Wade. He gestured to the 3 men flanking him. We served together in Operation Neptune's Anchor. We were hoping we could have a word. I felt the blood drain from my face. Operation Neptune's Anchor. A name I hadn't heard spoken aloud in over 3 years. A name that officially didn't exist, had never happened, was buried so deep in classified files that even thinking about it too loudly felt dangerous. I think there's been some mistake, I said carefully, my training kicking in automatically. Deny, deflect, disappear. But Commander Sullivan wasn't buying it. His eyes had found something, some detail that confirmed what he'd come here looking for. No mistake, ma'am. We've been trying to track down members of our unit for a reunion. Thought you might want to join us. My cousin Derek stepped forward, his chest puffed out with borrowed authority. Listen, I think you've got the wrong person. Sophia here isn't military. She's never even left Georgia. The 4 men turned to look at Derek, and something in their collective gaze made him take an involuntary step backward. Commander Sullivan's voice remained perfectly polite, but there was steel underneath it now. Son, I appreciate your concern, but I know exactly who I'm looking for. The deck was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in abandoned drinks. My family stood frozen, their familiar world suddenly tilted off its axis by the appearance of these 4 strangers who seemed to know something about me that they didn't. My father pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with confusion and what looked like embarrassment. Now see here, there's obviously been some confusion. My daughter has never served in any military capacity. I think I'd know if... Sir, Commander Sullivan interrupted gently, with respect, sometimes there are things about service that families aren't told. For security reasons. I felt trapped between 2 worlds. The one where I was Sophia Chen, the unremarkable computer repair technician who'd never done anything more dangerous than change a tire, and the other one, the one these 4 men had pulled with them from the shadows, like a fishing net dragging up secrets from the deep. Uncle Robert crossed his arms, his military bearing asserting itself. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but... That's when Commander Sullivan did something that changed everything. He rolled up his left sleeve, revealing a tattoo on his forearm. Not the typical military ink you'd expect, but something specific, deliberate. A compass rose intersected by 3 parallel lines, with coordinates barely visible beneath it. My breath caught. I knew that tattoo. I knew it because I had one just like it. The 4 men were watching me carefully now, and I realized they'd seen the recognition in my eyes. They knew I understood what they were showing me. Commander Sullivan's voice dropped barely above a whisper. Deepwater Unit 7, he said. Classified Naval Operations, 2019 to 2022. The words hit me like cold water. Deepwater Unit 7, my unit, my team, my life for 3 years that officially never existed. And suddenly, I understood why they were here. Why did they find me? Why, after all this time of careful anonymity, my past had walked up to my family's 4th of July barbecue and announced itself. The reunion wasn't just social. Something had happened. Something that required the survivors of Deepwater 7 to remember who they used to be. I looked around at my family's confused, skeptical faces, at Derek's deflated posture, at my mother's expression of bewildered concern. They had no idea who I really was. They had no idea what I'd done, what I'd survived, what I'd sacrificed, while they thought I was safely tucked away in my quiet little life. But these 4 men knew. And somehow, the secret I'd buried so carefully beneath 3 years of ordinary living was about to claw its way back to the surface. The question was whether my family was ready for the truth about who Sophia Chen really was. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant living inside a museum of military glory. Every wall told a story of service, sacrifice, and honor. Bronze stars gleamed in shadow boxes. Folded flags sat reverently on mantels. Black and white photographs of stern-faced men in uniform watched over our dinner table like silent sentinels. My earliest memory wasn't of bedtime stories or birthday parties. It was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor at age 4, watching my father methodically clean his service pistol while he explained the difference between courage and recklessness. His hands moved with practiced precision, each motion deliberate and sure. Courage, he would say, not looking up from his work, is doing what needs to be done even when you're scared. Recklessness is pretending you're not scared at all. I absorbed these lessons like gospel. By the time I was 6, I could identify the rank insignia of every branch of service. By 8, I knew the Pledge of Allegiance, the Sailor's Creed, and the proper way to fold an American flag. While other kids played video games, I practiced knot tying in the backyard until my fingers bled. But there was always an invisible line I couldn't cross. That's enough military talk for tonight, my mother would say when my questions grew too detailed, too technical. Why don't you go play with your dolls? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I didn't want to play with dolls. I wanted to understand tactics, strategy, the science of warfare that fascinated my father and uncle. But every time I pushed too hard, every time I showed too much interest in the family business, the conversation would shift away from me, like I was radioactive. The message was clear, even if nobody said it out loud. Military service was for Mitchell men. Women were meant to admire from a safe distance, to keep the home fires burning while their husbands and sons went off to do the real work. My mother had perfected this role. Sarah Mitchell, former Miss Georgia runner-up, who'd married my father straight out of college and spent the next 30 years being the perfect military wife. She organized charity events, hosted officers' wives' luncheons, and smiled graciously through every deployment and reassignment. But sometimes, when she thought nobody was watching, I'd catch her staring at those photographs on the wall with something that looked like longing, like she was wondering what stories she might have earned if the world had been different. School wasn't much better. In a small Georgia town where half the kids had military parents, there was a clear hierarchy. The boys whose fathers were officers got automatic respect. The girls whose fathers were officers got polite attention and invitations to the right parties. But we all understood our place in the ecosystem. I threw myself into athletics instead. Cross-country, swimming, martial arts, anything that demanded the kind of physical and mental discipline I craved. My coaches praised my work ethic, my ability to push through pain, and my natural leadership. But when recruiters came to our high school career fair, they focused on the boys. You could do ROTC in college, one Navy recruiter told me, barely glancing up from the paperwork he was organizing. Make a nice officer's wife someday. I wanted to punch him. Instead, I smiled politely and walked away, the familiar burn of dismissal settling in my chest like acid. The closest I came to rebellion was junior year, when I announced I was applying to the Naval Academy. The dinner table went silent for a full 30 seconds. My father set down his fork with deliberate care. "Sophia," he said finally, "that's not practical." "Why not? My grades are excellent. I'm team captain in 2 sports. I've been preparing for this my whole life." "You've been preparing for a lot of things," my mother interjected smoothly. "College, a career, marriage. The academy is intense, demanding. It changes people." What she meant was, it changes women in ways we don't approve of. It makes them hard, unfeminine, unpredictable. "Derek's planning to enlist after graduation," I pointed out. "Derek's different," my father said. And there it was. The truth laid bare. Derek was different because Derek was male, because Derek could carry on the family tradition without threatening anyone's worldview. I applied anyway. Got an interview, passed the physical fitness tests, even secured a nomination from our congressman. But somehow, mysteriously, my application got lost in the system. "A clerical error," they said. "These things happen." My father didn't look surprised when I told him. My mother offered to help me look at nice colleges with good programs for young women. The subject of military service was quietly, permanently closed. So I went to Georgia Tech instead, studied computer science because it was practical, safe, and exactly what everyone expected from the sensible Mitchell daughter. I learned programming languages and network security, skills that felt like consolation prizes compared to the life I'd really wanted. But I never stopped training. I ran 10 miles every morning before class. Spent my evenings at the martial arts dojo, learning Krav Maga from an ex-Israeli soldier who didn't care that I was female as long as I could take a hit and get back up. I taught myself tactical planning, studied military history, devoured every book on special operations I could find. My family thought it was a quirky hobby. Sophia and her little war games, they'd say, with indulgent smiles. Better than drugs or bad boyfriends, I suppose. They had no idea I was preparing for something. I wasn't sure what, exactly, but I knew that someday, somehow, I would find a way to prove that the blood running through my veins was just as Mitchell as anyone else's. College graduation was another performance. My parents beamed with pride as I walked across the stage with my computer science degree. Our practical girl, they called me. Always so sensible. I moved back to town, took a job at a small computer repair shop, and settled into the life they'd mapped out for me. Safe, predictable, forgettable. But every night, I kept training. Every morning, I kept running. Every day, I kept watching the news for stories that weren't making headlines. Operations that were happening in the shadows. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a very long, undercover operation. The irony was perfect, really. My family had trained me to be a soldier without realizing it. All those lessons about discipline, sacrifice, and keeping secrets. All those years of learning to hide my true feelings, to smile and nod while burning with frustrated ambition. They'd created the perfect covert operative. They just didn't know it yet. When the recruiter finally found me 2 years later, sitting alone at a coffee shop with my laptop, running penetration tests on my own network security just for fun, I was ready. He didn't look like what I'd expected. Middle-aged, unremarkable, the kind of man you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him. "Ms. Chen," he said, sliding into the chair across from me, "I think we need to talk." That conversation would change everything. But at the time, sitting in that mundane coffee shop in my mundane life, all I could think was, finally. Finally, someone had noticed what my family had spent 26 years overlooking. I was ready to disappear. The man who called himself Agent Harrison looked like he sold insurance for a living. Beige jacket, unremarkable tie, the kind of face that blended into any crowd. But his eyes held a sharpness that suggested he'd seen things most insurance salesmen never would. "Your computer skills are impressive," he said, sipping coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. "Particularly your work with encrypted networks and penetration testing." I kept my expression neutral. "It's a hobby. An expensive hobby. The equipment you've been acquiring, the specialized software licenses, the frequency analysis tools." He leaned back in his chair. "Someone's been watching your purchases, Ms. Chen." My pulse quickened, but years of hiding my true interests from my family had taught me to keep my face blank. "Is that illegal?" "Not illegal, just interesting." He pulled out a tablet, swiped to something that made him nod approvingly. "Tell me, what do you know about cyber warfare?" The question hung between us like a challenge. I could lie, pretend ignorance, maintain the cover I'd built so carefully. Or I could take the leap I'd been preparing for my entire life. "I know it's the future of conflict," I said finally. "Physical warfare requires territory, resources, traditional military infrastructure. Cyber operations can cripple entire nations from a basement apartment." Harrison's smile was thin but genuine. "Interesting perspective. What else?" "I know that most military cyber units are staffed by people who learned computers in the service, not people who understood warfare before they touched a keyboard. There's a gap between technical skill and tactical thinking. And you believe you could bridge that gap?" I met his eyes. I know I could. What followed was the strangest job interview of my life. Not in some sterile government building, but in a series of seemingly random locations over the next 3 weeks. A park bench near the river. The back booth of a diner on the interstate. The parking lot of a Home Depot, where Harrison pretended to load mulch while asking me about advanced persistent threats and social engineering. Each conversation went deeper. He'd present scenarios, hypothetical cyber attacks, defensive strategies, ways to infiltrate enemy networks without leaving digital fingerprints. I found myself sketching tactical approaches on napkins, explaining how psychological warfare principles applied to phishing campaigns, describing how you could map an entire military command structure by analyzing metadata patterns. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. after I'd outlined a particularly complex infiltration strategy. Books, online courses, military history. Pattern recognition? I shrugged. When you grow up in a military family but can't serve, you find other ways to study warfare. The testing phase came next. Not written exams, but practical exercises that pushed every skill I'd developed in isolation. They gave me access to a secured computer lab and a series of challenges that would have taken most people months to solve. I cracked their first encryption in 4 hours. Penetrated their impenetrable network in 6. By the end of the week, I'd demonstrated vulnerabilities in systems they'd assumed were bulletproof. Impressive, Harrison said, reviewing my work, but technical skill isn't enough for what we have in mind. This position requires someone who can think like a soldier and act like a ghost. That's when the physical training began. I thought I was in good shape. Years of running, martial arts, and self-imposed military conditioning had given me strength and endurance. But the program Harrison enrolled me in operated on a completely different level. The facility looked like an abandoned warehouse from the outside. Inside, it was a precision instrument designed to break people down and rebuild them as weapons. My instructor was a woman named Captain Lisa Rodriguez, formerly of Marine Force Recon, who could have benchmarked me through a wall but chose to do it with words instead. Forget everything you think you know about being tough, she said on day 1. This isn't about proving you're as good as the boys. This is about becoming something the boys can't even imagine. The training was unlike anything I'd experienced. Not just physical conditioning, but psychological preparation for operations that couldn't officially exist. We learned to fight in environments where traditional rules didn't apply. Close quarters combat in server rooms. Escape and evasion in urban environments. How to maintain cover while gathering intelligence at corporate events. But the real education came from my fellow trainees. 12 people total, drawn from backgrounds so diverse it seemed random until you looked closer. A former NSA analyst who'd grown up in foster care. An Army Ranger with a doctorate in international relations. A CIA operative who spoke 7 languages and could kill you with a coffee cup. And me. The computer repair technician from Georgia who'd been training for a war nobody knew she wanted to fight. "What's your story, Chen?" asked Marcus Thompson, a former Navy EOD specialist during a break between tactical exercises. "Most of us got here through traditional channels. You just appeared." I'd gotten used to deflecting personal questions. Sometimes talent finds its own way. But Thompson was persistent. Nobody gets this good at combat systems integration without real experience. Where did you serve? I didn't serve, I said honestly. I prepared. That answer seemed to satisfy him, though I caught him watching me with curious eyes during subsequent training sessions. Thompson was good, very good. But he approached problems with textbook solutions. I found myself thinking in directions that surprised even my instructors. "Chen," Captain Rodriguez called after I'd successfully infiltrated and extracted intelligence from a simulated enemy command center. "Walk me through your approach." Standard penetration would have triggered their motion sensors, I explained, but their network architecture assumed physical security was absolute. I accessed their wireless network from the parking lot, used social engineering to get administrative credentials, then spoofed their internal communications to create a false maintenance window. And the physical component? Never went inside. Redirected their surveillance feeds to loop footage from an earlier time, then used their own systems to print the documents I needed at an off-site location they thought was secure. Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Unorthodox. Effective. How did you know about the off-site printer?" "Every secure facility has a backup plan. I spent 3 days mapping their personnel's digital habits. Found their contingency protocols and metadata from email attachments their IT department didn't realize were being transmitted." It was Thompson who finally figured it out. 3 months into training, during a particularly complex exercise that required infiltrating a mock terrorist cell, he approached me with an expression of dawning recognition. "You think like someone who's been excluded," he said quietly, "not like someone who's inexperienced. Like someone who's been watching from outside, learning patterns other people miss." He was right. Years of being dismissed by my family had taught me to see things differently. to find angles that traditional military thinking missed. I'd learned to be invisible, to gather intelligence from positions of assumed powerlessness, to accomplish objectives through methods that wouldn't occur to people who'd always had direct access to power. That's not necessarily a bad thing, Thompson continued. Some of the best operators I've known were outsiders. They see opportunities the rest of us miss. By the time Harrison returned to evaluate our progress, I'd distinguished myself not just in technical skills, but in creative problem-solving that consistently surprised my instructors. I could hack systems that should have been impenetrable, infiltrate organizations that should have detected me, and extract intelligence using methods that felt more like art than science. Ready for the real world? Harrison asked, reviewing my final assessments. I've been ready my whole life, I said. What I didn't know was that the real world was about to be far stranger and more dangerous than anything they'd trained me for. The unit I was about to join didn't officially exist. The missions we'd undertake would never make it into any official record. And the enemy we'd be fighting operated by rules that nobody had written down. But for the first time since childhood, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, even if nobody else knew I was there. Deepwater Unit 7 operated out of a facility that didn't appear on any map. Officially, the building housed a maritime research institute studying oceanic thermodynamics. In reality, it was the nerve center for the Navy's most classified cyber warfare operations, buried so deep in black budget funding that even its existence was compartmentalized. I'd been with the unit for 18 months when Operation Neptune's anchor began. By then, I'd earned my place among some of the most elite operatives in the military. Commander James Sullivan ran a tight ship, but he'd learned to trust my unconventional approaches. Petty officers Martinez, Thompson, and Wade had become more than teammates. They were family in a way my blood relatives had never been. The mission briefing came on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other. Sullivan gathered us in the secure conference room, walls lined with Faraday mesh to prevent electronic surveillance. The target was a maritime logistics company called Poseidon Global, ostensibly moving cargo containers between international ports. Intelligence suggests Poseidon is facilitating weapons transfers to hostile nations, Sullivan explained, clicking through satellite photos of shipping facilities. Traditional surveillance has been ineffective. They're using advanced encryption, changing protocols daily, operating with OPSEC that rivals our own. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would infiltrate Poseidon's corporate headquarters during their annual cybersecurity conference, posing as a freelance consultant. While their technical staff was distracted by presentations and networking, I'd gain access to their core systems and extract evidence of illegal arms trafficking. Chen goes in alone, Sullivan continued. The rest of us provide overwatch and extraction support. Clean insertion, clean data acquisition, clean exit. Thompson raised his hand. What about backup communications? If their security is as good as we think? That's why Chen's perfect for this, Sullivan interrupted. She doesn't need backup communications. She improvises. It should have been a routine operation. I'd done dozens of similar infiltrations, each one successful, each one adding to my reputation as someone who could get into places that shouldn't be penetrable. But there was something different about Neptune's anchor from the beginning. Subtle signs that I should have recognized as warnings. The conference was held at a luxury hotel in Miami, the kind of place where corporate executives played at being important, while real decisions were made in back rooms they'd never see. I'd crafted my cover identity carefully. Dr. Sarah Kim, cybersecurity specialist with a PhD from MIT and impressive credentials in network architecture. The Poseidon executives I needed to target were surprisingly easy to approach. Too easy, in retrospect. They seemed almost eager to discuss their security protocols, to show off their sophisticated systems, to invite me for private tours of their advanced data protection infrastructure. We've heard about your work, said Richard Voss, Poseidon's chief technology officer, over drinks at the hotel bar. Rumor has it you've consulted for some very exclusive clients. I maintained my cover, speaking vaguely about government contracts and sensitive applications. But Voss's questions were too specific, too knowing. He asked about techniques that only someone with deep intelligence knowledge would understand. You're very well informed for a shipping executive, I said carefully. His smile was cold and knowing. We take security very seriously at Poseidon, especially when it comes to uninvited guests. That's when I knew the operation was compromised. Somehow they'd been expecting me, but I was already deep inside their facility, committed to a mission that was turning into a trap with every passing minute. I tried to abort, following standard protocol for blown operations. But when I reached the extraction point, Thompson and Wade weren't there. Radio silence on all channels. Sullivan and Martinez had vanished as completely as if they'd never existed. The realization hit me like cold water. I was alone, surrounded by hostiles who knew exactly who I was and why I'd come. The next 6 hours became a nightmare of urban warfare. Poseidon's security team wasn't composed of rent-a-cops or even military contractors. They moved like special operations, coordinated like people who'd been planning this confrontation for months. I fought my way through parking garages and hotel corridors, using every skill I'd learned in training, every improvised tactic that had made me valuable. But they had advantages I couldn't overcome. They knew the terrain, had superior numbers, and most importantly, they seemed to know my methods, my preferred escape routes, and my tactical patterns. I made it to the waterfront before they cornered me. 3 against 1 in a shipping container yard that felt like a maze designed specifically for this moment. I took down 2 of them before the third put a dart in my neck that sent the world spinning into chemical darkness. When I woke up, I was in a holding facility that definitely wasn't official. Clean, sterile, designed for people who needed to disappear quietly. The man who entered my cell wore a suit that cost more than my annual salary, and spoke with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to face consequences. "Miss Chen," he said, settling into a chair across from my restraint table. "Or should I say Dr. Kim? Or perhaps we should discuss your real name and your real employer." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice hoarse from whatever they'd used to sedate me. "Of course you don't." He opened a tablet, scrolled through what looked like a comprehensive dossier. "Deepwater Unit 7. Operation Neptune's Anchor. Commander Sullivan, who I understand trained you personally." My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a blown operation. This was total exposure of a classified unit that officially didn't exist. "Here's what's going to happen," the man continued. "You're going to tell us everything about Deepwater 7's operations, past and future. Personnel, methods, mission parameters. In exchange, we might let you live long enough to see a trial. And if I refuse?" His smile was genuinely amused. "Ms. Chen, you seem to be under the impression that you have a choice in this matter." That's when he showed me the photographs: Sullivan, Martinez, Thompson, Wade. All of them in similar holding cells. All of them looking as beaten and confused as I felt. But there was something else in the photos. Something that made my heart stop. The timestamps. The photos had been taken before my mission began, before Neptune's Anchor was even supposed to start. "You see," the man said, watching my face carefully, "your teammates have been our guests for several days now, which raises some interesting questions about who actually sent you on this mission, doesn't it?" The room seemed to tilt around me. If my team had been captured before the operation began, then who had given me the mission briefing? Who had sent me to Poseidon Global? Who had access to our protocols, our communication codes, our operational security? "The person who betrayed your unit," the man continued, "was someone with complete access to your organization, someone you trusted absolutely, someone who decided that Deepwater 7 had become more trouble than it was worth." I closed my eyes, trying to process the magnitude of what he was telling me. Not just that the mission was a trap, but that the trap had been set by someone inside our own command structure. Someone who knew us well enough to orchestrate our complete destruction. "Who?" I whispered. "That's a conversation for later," he said, standing. "First, you're going to help us understand exactly how much damage Deepwater 7 has done to our operations over the past 2 years." As the door closed behind him, leaving me alone with restraints and the growing realization that everything I'd believed about my mission, my unit, and my purpose had been built on lies, I understood that this wasn't just about a failed operation. This was about erasure. Someone had decided that Deepwater Unit 7 needed to disappear, and they'd found the perfect way to make it happen. The question that would haunt me through the long nights that followed was simple and devastating. Who had we trusted enough to give them the power to destroy us? The escape took 3 days of careful planning and 1 moment of perfect chaos. I'd been studying my captors' patterns, memorizing shift changes, noting weaknesses in their surveillance protocols. When Hurricane Diana made landfall 70 miles south of our location, the facility's backup generators failed for exactly 47 seconds during the power transfer. 47 seconds was enough. I'd picked the lock on my restraints weeks earlier using a hairpin I'd fashioned from the metal rim of my food tray. The real challenge was moving through a building filled with people trained to catch escapees. But years of being underestimated had taught me the value of misdirection. While security swept the upper floors looking for signs of forced entry, I went down. The facility's sub-basement housed their server farm, a maze of humming processors and blinking lights that most people found disorienting. But to me, it was home territory. Their cybersecurity was military grade, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed the threat would come from outside. I spent 6 hours inside their network, not stealing files, but understanding the architecture of the conspiracy that had destroyed my unit. What I found was worse than betrayal. It was systematic, calculated annihilation. Poseidon Global wasn't just a shipping company facilitating weapons transfers. It was a front operation for a network of defense contractors who'd been selling classified military technology to foreign buyers. Deepwater 7 had been investigating them for months without knowing it, stumbling closer to evidence that could have exposed billions in illegal arms deals. But the most devastating discovery was buried in encrypted communications between Poseidon's executives and someone identified only as Phoenix. Reading those messages, I felt my world collapse in real time. Phoenix had provided detailed intelligence about Deepwater 7's capabilities, mission parameters, and personnel files. Phoenix had suggested the trap at the cybersecurity conference. Phoenix had ensured that my teammates would be captured before they could provide support. And Phoenix's communication signature matched the encryption protocols used by Admiral Patricia Hawkins, Director of Naval Special Operations Command. The woman who'd personally authorized Deepwater 7's creation. The person who'd sent us on Operation Neptune's anchor. My commanding officer. The architect of our unit. The person we'd trusted with our lives. She'd sold us out for $30 million in untraceable cryptocurrency. I downloaded everything I could carry on a portable drive I'd cobbled together from salvaged components, then triggered a cascade failure that would make their servers inoperable for days. By the time security realized I was gone, I was already 3 states away, driving a stolen pickup truck toward the only person I could trust. Marcus Thompson had been rotated to a training facility in Virginia 2 months before Neptune's anchor. Officially, it was a routine assignment. In reality, it had saved his life. When I showed up at his apartment at 3 a.m, soaked from rain and shaking from exhaustion, he took one look at my face and let me in without questions. "Jesus, Chen, we thought you were dead. All of you." I handed him the drive. "Sullivan, Martinez, Wade, they're alive, being held at a private facility in South Carolina. But Thompson, we've been burned. Completely." He poured coffee while I explained what I'd discovered. With each revelation, his expression grew darker. When I reached the part about Admiral Hawkins, he set down his mug so hard it cracked. "That's impossible. Hawkins created Deepwater 7. She handpicked every member. She sold us," I interrupted. "For money, for connections, for whatever reason people betray everything they're supposed to protect." Thompson was quiet for a long time, staring at the drive like it contained nuclear launch codes. "What's your plan?" "Rescue the team, expose Hawkins, destroy Poseidon Global's operation." "With what resources? What backup?" "Chen, we're ghosts. Officially, Deepwater 7 never existed. If Hawkins has betrayed us, then we have no chain of command, no support structure, no way to prove what we're saying is true." That's when I pulled up my left sleeve and showed him the tattoo I'd gotten during our first month of operations. It looked like abstract geometric patterns to most people, but Thompson recognized it immediately. We all had them. Unique biometric identifiers encoded in UV reactive ink that could only be read with specialized equipment. "The tattoos weren't just identification," I said. "They were insurance. Each one contains GPS coordinates to a cache site where Sullivan stored evidence of our operations. Thompson's eyes widened. He never told us about any cache sites. He told me, just me, in case something like this happened. I traced the coordinates with my finger. Northern Virginia, hidden where only someone with our training could find it. The cache was buried beneath a seemingly abandoned ranger station in Shenandoah National Park. It took us 2 days of hiking and careful surveillance to locate the precise spot. Thompson kept watch while I excavated the waterproof container Sullivan had buried 18 months earlier. Inside was a treasure trove of evidence, mission recordings, encrypted communications, financial records proving that Deepwater 7 had been investigating Poseidon Global long before Neptune's anchor. But most importantly, there were video files of Admiral Hawkins briefing our unit, speaking about operations that officially never happened. "This proves we existed," Thompson said, scrolling through the files on a ruggedized laptop. "But it also proves we were working outside normal command authority." "Look at the timestamps," I said, pointing to metadata from Hawkins's communications. "Every major decision, every mission parameter, every change in operational focus, they all corresponded with encrypted messages from Poseidon executives." Thompson's face went pale as the implications sank in. She wasn't just selling information about our operations. She was steering our investigations away from anything that might threaten their network. For how long? From the beginning, Deepwater 7 wasn't created to fight cyber warfare threats. We were created to be a controllable asset that could be directed away from threats Poseidon wanted to keep hidden. The full scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Hawkins had used our unit as a smokescreen, letting us tackle small-scale operations while ensuring we never came close to the massive arms trafficking network she was protecting. When we'd finally stumbled onto evidence that could expose the whole operation, she decided we were more valuable as scapegoats than as assets. But there was one element she hadn't accounted for: the tattoos. In her arrogance, she'd assumed that destroying our official records would be enough to erase us from existence. She hadn't considered that Sullivan might have created an insurance policy that existed outside any system she could control. "We need to get this to someone who can act on it," Thompson said. "Who?" "Hawkins controls our entire command structure. Anyone we approach will be told we're rogue operatives making wild accusations. Then we don't go through official channels." I looked at him questioningly. "Media, congressional oversight, inspector general, someone who doesn't answer to Hawkins." It was risky, potentially career-ending, definitely against every protocol we'd been trained to follow. But as I stared at the evidence of our betrayal, I realized we didn't have careers to protect anymore. We had something more important: the truth. And the truth about Admiral Patricia Hawkins, about Poseidon Global, about the systematic corruption of military special operations, was about to become very public. But first, we had to rescue our teammates. Because whatever happened next, we were going to face it together. The tattoo on my arm had saved us once. Now it was time to see if it could save the others. Thompson looked at me with something approaching awe. "You know what this means, don't you? Going public with this information? It'll change everything." I thought about my family, still convinced I was nothing more than a computer repair technician who'd never done anything important. Soon they'd learn the truth about who I really was, what I'd really done, and how close I'd come to disappearing forever. "Good," I said. "It's time for some changes." The rescue operation took place on a moonless night in November, exactly 43 days after my escape. Thompson and I had spent weeks conducting surveillance on the facility where our teammates were being held, mapping guard rotations, identifying vulnerabilities, planning an extraction that would make our training instructors proud. But we weren't going in alone. Senator Elizabeth Carver, chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, had reviewed our evidence with a team of cybersecurity experts and constitutional lawyers. What she found was enough to authorize a joint FBI Naval Criminal Investigative Service raid on the facility, with Thompson and me serving as tactical advisors. "This is the largest breach of military security protocols in modern history," Senator Carver had told us during our classified briefing. "Admiral Hawkins didn't just betray your unit. She compromised ongoing operations across 3 different combat theaters." The raid itself was surgical, precise, overwhelming, 24 federal agents coordinated with Marine Force recon units to secure the facility within 8 minutes. By the time private security realized what was happening, Sullivan, Martinez, and Wade were already being evacuated to military medical facilities. I found Sullivan in the medical wing, conscious but weak from weeks of interrogation and isolation. When he saw me, his eyes filled with something between relief and disbelief. "Chen," he whispered, "how did you?" "The tattoos worked exactly like you planned," I said, gripping his hand. "The cash, the evidence, all of it. We found everything." He managed a smile. "I knew if anyone could figure it out, it would be you." Martinez was in worse shape, requiring surgery for injuries sustained during his capture. But Wade was already demanding to know when he could return to duty, apparently under the impression that Deepwater 7 was still operational. "There is no more Deepwater 7, Thompson explained gently. "Hawkins burned the program when she burned us." Quote, "The trials began 6 months later. Admiral Patricia Hawkins faced charges of treason, conspiracy, and violation of the Espionage Act. Poseidon Global's executives were arrested in coordinated raids across 4 countries. The arms trafficking network they'd built was systematically dismantled by an international task force. I testified before a closed session of Congress, walking senators through the technical details of how the conspiracy had operated. The room was filled with some of the most powerful people in government, but I felt none of the intimidation I might have expected. After everything I'd survived, congressional hearings seemed almost mundane. "Ms. Chen," Senator Carver asked during my testimony, "in your professional opinion, how long had this conspiracy been operating?" "Based on the financial records we recovered, at least 8 years, possibly longer." Admiral Hawkins had been steering military cyber operations away from threats to their network since before Deepwater 7 was even created. "And your unit's investigation threatened to expose this?" "Yes, ma'am. We'd traced several attacks back to weapons systems that should have been impossible for hostile nations to acquire. If we'd continued following that trail, we would have uncovered the entire operation within weeks." The most satisfying moment came when Hawkins herself took the stand. The woman who'd commanded my absolute loyalty, who'd shaped my understanding of duty and honor, looked smaller somehow under the harsh courtroom lighting. When her defense attorney asked if she regretted her actions, her answer was chillingly matter-of-fact. "I regret getting caught," she said. "But I don't regret protecting American defense contractors from overzealous investigations that threatened jobs and economic stability." She'd convinced herself that betraying her own people was patriotic, that selling military secrets was somehow serving the greater good. Even facing life in prison, she maintained that her actions were justified. The judge sentenced her to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. But justice in a courtroom was only the beginning of rebuilding what she'd destroyed. 6 months after the trials concluded, I received a call from the new director of Naval Special Operations Command, Admiral Rebecca Torres. She'd been brought in specifically to clean house and rebuild programs that had been compromised by Hawkins' corruption. "Ms. Chen," she said during our meeting at the Pentagon, "I'd like to offer you something that should have been offered years ago. A commission as a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, with immediate assignment to lead a new cyber warfare unit." I sat in that pristine office, surrounded by the flags and symbols I'd grown up revering, finally being offered everything I dreamed of as a child. Official recognition, military rank, the chance to serve my country openly, proudly, with full support of the institution I'd always wanted to join. "Thank you, Admiral," I said finally, "but I decline." Her eyebrows rose. "May I ask why?" "Because the military didn't want me when I was young and idealistic and desperate to serve. They only want me now because I've proven I can survive without them. I've built something better than what they're offering." And I had. Thompson, Sullivan, Martinez, Wade, and I had founded a private cybersecurity firm called Deepwater Solutions. We specialized in protecting organizations from the kind of insider threats that had nearly destroyed us. Our client list included government agencies, defense contractors, and international corporations who needed security expertise from people who understood how systems could be compromised from within. But more importantly, we'd created something that had never existed before, a support network for military personnel whose service had been erased or denied. Veterans whose missions were classified beyond recognition. Operators whose sacrifices had been buried in bureaucratic black holes. We called it the Phoenix Network, a deliberate reclamation of the codename Hawkins had used to betray us. Members received legal support, medical care, career placement assistance, and most importantly, validation that their service mattered, even if it couldn't be officially acknowledged. "You're building something outside the system," Admiral Torres observed. "I'm building something better than the system," I corrected. "Something that can't be corrupted by people like Hawkins, because it doesn't depend on institutional authority for legitimacy." The work was challenging, meaningful, and profitable. More importantly, it was honest. We weren't hiding our identities or operating under false covers. We were exactly who we appeared to be. Elite operators who'd survived betrayal and chosen to use that experience to protect others. But perhaps the most significant change was personal. For a moment, I felt the old instinct to minimize, to deflect, to make myself smaller so they could feel more comfortable. Instead, I pulled my collar aside and showed them the tattoo. "This contains coordinates to classified evidence caches," I said quietly. "Each member of Deepwater Unit 7 carries one. When the unit was betrayed by our commanding officer, these tattoos were the only proof we had that we'd ever existed." My grandmother leaned forward in her chair, squinting at the markings. "What kind of work did you do, dear?" "Cyber warfare, deep infiltration. Operations that couldn't be officially acknowledged." I looked directly at Derek. "The kind of missions that separate the operators from the tourists." Brandon, who'd been so smug about my safe job an hour earlier, now looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. "But you work at a computer repair shop?" "I own a cybersecurity firm worth $40 million, I corrected. "The computer shop was my cover for 3 years while I recovered from a mission that went sideways and cost me everything I thought I was fighting for." Thompson spoke up from beside Sullivan. "Ma'am, if I may, your daughter didn't just serve, she revolutionized how we approach asymmetric cyber threats. Her infiltration techniques are being taught at advanced schools across all service branches." My mother's hand flew to her throat. "Oh my God. Sophia, why didn't you tell us?" That question hung in the Georgia air like humidity, thick and inescapable. Why hadn't I told them? Why had I let them believe I was nothing more than their disappointment, their cautionary tale about playing it safe? "Because you never asked who I really was," I said simply. "You decided who I was supposed to be when I was 6 years old, and nothing I accomplished after that mattered if it didn't fit your expectations." Uncle Robert, the family patriarch, set down his beer with shaking hands. "Sophia, we had no idea. Your father said you'd applied to the Naval Academy but didn't qualify." I turned to look at my father, who had gone very pale. "Dad?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "The application. I thought I was protecting you. Military life is hard on women. The culture, the pressure, the way you'd be treated. I thought a civilian career would be better for you. You sabotaged my application." It wasn't a question. I'd suspected for years, but hearing him admit it felt like having a splinter finally extracted from an old wound. "I talked to the congressman," he whispered. "Asked him to withdraw his nomination. I thought you'd thank me eventually." The deck went silent again. Even the children playing in the yard seemed to sense that something important was happening among the adults. "Dad," I said gently, "you didn't protect me. You stole my choice. But it doesn't matter now because I found my own way." Commander Sullivan stepped closer. "Sir, your daughter's service record is classified, but I can tell you this. She's earned decorations that can't be publicly acknowledged for operations that saved thousands of lives. The respect she commands in our community is absolute." I watched my father process this information, saw decades of assumptions crumbling in real time. This man who'd raised me on military values, but couldn't imagine me living them, who'd taught me about honor and sacrifice while ensuring I'd never have the chance to demonstrate either. "There's something else you should know," I said, addressing the entire gathering. "The reason these gentlemen found me today isn't coincidence. We're launching a new initiative." Martinez stepped forward, carrying a folder I'd asked him to bring. "The Phoenix Foundation provides support, resources, and advocacy for military personnel whose service has been classified, denied, or erased. We help people whose sacrifices can't be officially recognized. We're particularly focused on women and minorities who've served in Black operations, Wade added. People who've been excluded from traditional veteran support networks because their service doesn't officially exist. I opened the folder and pulled out several photographs, images of the memorial wall we'd erected at our headquarters, engraved with names that appeared on no other monument, women who'd died in operations that never happened, men who'd sacrificed everything for missions that couldn't be acknowledged. This is Rodriguez, I said, pointing to one name, Marine Force Recon, killed during a hostage rescue in Syria. Officially, she was never there. I moved to another name, Jackson, Army Special Forces, lost his leg defusing a bomb in Yemen. His injury was classified as a training accident. My family listened in stunned silence as I continued through the wall of forgotten heroes, people who'd bled for their country without recognition, who'd died without honors, who'd returned home carrying invisible wounds from invisible wars. The foundation isn't just about providing services, I explained. It's about creating a place where truth matters more than bureaucracy, where service is honored regardless of whether it can be publicly acknowledged. My cousin Linda, who'd been so proud of Derek's basic training stories, now looked embarrassed. How many people are there like you? Like them? Thousands, Thompson answered. Maybe tens of thousands. People who served at the highest levels but can't talk about it, can't get help for it, can't even prove it happened. I looked around at my family one more time, these people who'd shaped my understanding of military service while never imagining I could be part of it myself. I spent my childhood wanting to earn a place at this table, I said, wanting to be included in your stories, your traditions, your respect. But I learned something important during my service. Sometimes you have to build your own table. Derek, who'd been quiet through most of this revelation, finally spoke up. Cousin Sophia, I'm sorry. We all are. We should have known. Should have seen. No, I said, surprising myself with how gentle my voice was. You couldn't have seen because I was trained not to be seen. That was the job. But I'm not hiding anymore. Commander Sullivan handed me an envelope I'd been expecting. Ms. Chen, on behalf of the Secretary of the Navy, I'm authorized to present you with the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism during Operation Neptune's Anchor. This ceremony was supposed to happen 3 years ago. I accepted the medal, feeling its weight in my hands. The highest honor the Navy could bestow, short of the Medal of Honor itself. Recognition that had been delayed by bureaucracy and betrayal but had finally found its way home. But as I held it, I realized something that would have surprised my younger self. I didn't need it anymore. The validation I'd spent my life seeking from institutions and family members had been replaced by something more valuable. The knowledge that I'd built something meaningful from the wreckage of my dreams. Thank you, I said to Sullivan, but I think this belongs with the others. I walked to my car and returned with a small wooden box. Inside were the decorations earned by other members of Deepwater 7, medals that had been awarded in classified ceremonies and locked away in security vaults. These are going on permanent display at the Foundation, I announced, along with the stories of the people who earned them. Not for glory, but for memory. So that someday, when these operations can be declassified, people will know what really happened. As the sun began to set over Uncle Robert's deck, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I looked around at my family one last time. They were different now, these people who'd known me my whole life but had never really seen me. There was respect in their eyes, but more importantly, there was curiosity. For the first time, they wanted to know who I really was. Will you tell us, my mother asked quietly, about your service, about what you've been through? Some of it, I said, the parts I'm allowed to share, but mostly I'd like to tell you about what comes next. About the people we're helping. The lives we're changing. The truth we're finally able to speak. And for the first time in my life, sitting at my family's table, I felt like I belonged there, not because they'd finally accepted me, but because I'd finally accepted myself. The tattoo on my shoulder wasn't just a coordinate anymore. It was a compass, pointing not backward to the approval I'd once desperately sought, but forward to the legacy I was still building. Some stories end with going home. This one began there. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.